However, something this joinder also does is allow you to step outside of your artificial person. You don't have to represent this artificial person when you want to. For instance, in a court of law.
See, they're very aware of your free will, and they're very aware they cannot force you to represent these. So they need you to get to believe that you have to do it. See, when I stood there in court that day, even though I have a social insurance number, even though there are times I like representing the taxpayer, that moment in court, I did not want to represent him. And so they had to make, because I wasn't representing them, they had no choice. They couldn't trap me back into it. That's the power of your free will, is when you know who you are, you know also who you're not.
In Canada and worldwide, the illusion we've created is just that. It has only been created out of greed and can only affect us if we get who we are and what we believe to be the truth, as broad and interwoven as the illusion is with reality. Now, this seems to be the case of what is happening today in our country. You think that the roads get paid for by income tax? No. Sorry. Road tax on our gas pays for the maintenance of our roads. How about schools? Education? Well, believe it or not, that's what property tax is for. 100% of your income tax goes to one thing: servitude.
We of the congressmen and the senators, we're supporting them, aren't we?
Well, yes.
Yes. Well, then why can't we list them as dependents and deduct them?
The main purpose of the income tax is not to raise revenue, but to redistribute wealth and to control society.
A lot of people might say, well, gee, if there wasn't an income tax, what would happen to education? They don't understand.
100% of what is collected is absorbed solely by interest on the federal debt. All individual income tax revenues are gone before 1 nickel is spent on the services taxpayers expect from government.
The British North American Act in 1867 recognized that the 4 provinces, Upper and Lower Canada, New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, were to be federally united, were such a union under one common law, and to be conditioned to the welfare of the provinces. So, before we had Canada, we had just 4 separate provinces. Now look at it this way. You and 3 different neighbors, and each household has to do all the duties for everything within. So they decided that Confederation would allow a separate entity to look after all things that were common within them. But the provinces had the ability to say what the federal government would look after, also what they would look after. So, who had the power in the first place? That's right, the provinces.
They're creating a situation that fits them, so they have no reason to stop limiting our control, but to increasing it to extract more money from us.
What they surrendered to the federal government was the right to collect indirect taxes, a tax upon some right or privilege or corporate franchise. Ordinarily, all taxes paid primarily by a person who could shift the burden upon someone else, who are under no legal compulsion to pay them, are considered indirect taxes. What the provincial government retained was the right to collect direct taxes, one that is imposed directly upon property according to its value. It is generally spoken of as a property or tax ad valorem.
The Constitution of Canada does not belong either to Parliament or to the legislatures. It belongs to the country, and it is there that the citizens of the country will find the protection of the rights to which they are entitled. That's a Supreme Court of Canada decision of 1951, the Attorney General of Nova Scotia and the Attorney General.
So what this pretty much does is this. This was done so that the provincial government can contract the federal government to do its own duties. Think about this. How many income tax forms do you file? 1 federal and 1 provincial, right? Why do you send them both to the federal?
It is a single point, was the whole reason of what happened in my court case. Why I didn't have to say a word. Okay? When I went into court and I kept beaking there and I said, but Your Honor, you know, I said, I don't even know if I'm supposed to be here. She goes, well, there's an order here that you're a natural person. There's an order here that you're a defendant. And I didn't really hear her say that, so I kept beaking again, and she goes, you know, I thought she said shut up or something, but she said, don't worry, sit down. Why would a judge at the beginning of a trial tell someone not to worry and just sit down? What did she know I didn't know? The one effect of the Bill of Rights, which applies only to who? Natural persons, is to prescribe a firm rule for the resolution of a conflict between the Bill of Rights and another statute. So what was the essence of my court case? There was an order that I was there as a human being, natural person, Canadian Bill of Rights. So what we had was a conflict between a natural person protected by the Canadian and the Income Tax Act. Who do you think is going to win? Well, she already knew what the law said. She goes, if the conflict is between a Bill of Rights and another statute, the Bill of Rights must, in all cases, prevail over the conflicting statute. That's why she said, don't worry, sit down. It was game over.
What happened now was that they knew that 80% of all taxes were indirect taxes, so they made it a law. Every 5 years, they apportion a fixed sum and then so much per head. This is called transfer payments. This term you definitely need to remember as well. So how did income tax start in Canada? Income tax started in 1913 when Canada passed the Bank Act and surrendered to print issue currency to self-proclaimed elitists, the private merchant bankers. The international bankers now control the federal government and the monetary system, and since then they created laws like the Income Tax Act. It was brought in as a part of the War Measures Act, believe it or not, only because the first form of income tax was a war times tax, and was gladly accepted by the people of Canada. It was said that it would be removed once the war was over. This was an unconstitutional tax, but they could do it because of the War Measures Act.
See, because of the fundamental foundation of our country, they couldn't just say, hey people, you're going to have to pay income tax. They had to actually bring it in, and they had to bring it in under certain conditions. So first thing they did, they created World War I and passed the War Measures Act. You know, we look at that and say, what, they created it? Yes. These bankers, they finance both sides, and they pick and tell who's going to win. Okay? And then that allowed our government, our federal government, to pass the War Measures Act, which, because there was a national emergency, a concern, certain times, under certain acts like this, our federal government is allowed to leave its jurisdiction, to go and make laws it's normally not allowed to make, and one of them was entering the field of direct taxation. From there they passed, the next year they passed the Special War Revenue Act in 1915. Okay, they go to the people, you know, hey, you know, the war, we got to do our patriotic duty, we got to pay taxes and stuff, we need a little bit, so they brought it in there. Next year, they said we need a little bit more money, they want to pass the Business Profit War Tax Act in 1916. Went to the people and said, we need more money, you know, we like our freedom, we need to pay for it, but we're only going to tax the businesses. So nobody really cared. Then they finally passed the War Income Tax Act in 1917. And that was the first time in Canada's history we had income tax. And yet today we think it's been around forever. But look at what they had to do just to get to that point. And even at that point it was unconstitutional, but they had the authority to do it under the War Measures Act, as it was a direct tax which was the exclusive jurisdiction of the provinces, but was considered a necessity because of the World War. And because it didn't affect the average person much like it does today, few people were even concerned or even bothered to question the legality. See, when you really look at this whole game in the big time frame, this had nothing to do with money. They didn't care if they made a penny off of it. They just needed to get an Income Tax Act into Parliament, into the legislation. Okay, back then, I think for the average individual, it was 3% on the first $10,000, or 10,000, which is equivalent to like $300,000 today. We wouldn't be sitting in this room if income tax was 3% on the first $300,000 you made, would we? We would even tolerate that. Okay, that was not the intent. It was the illusion they brought it in. They triggered our patriotic duty.